These are certain things which we do not give a great importance. Property insurance in India is coming up in a very, very big way so that it is able to protect itself from further damages. Insurance coverage that helps financial protection of an individual or a company. Good morning and welcome to the second session in Unit 3, Principles and Practice of General Insurance, where we are going to talk about the miscellaneous insurance second part. Now, we had spoken about miscellaneous insurance previously in the previous session, trying to make you understand about the various other types of insurances like the personal accident insurance or the claims insurance, or when we look into the mediclaim process and together. So now we are going to continue with that and try to understand about this non-miscellaneous factors altogether. Now, miscellaneous insurance contracts of the insurance other than these of life, fire, this is one of the most important thing. Why? Because when you look into this picture, you would be able to see here very, very clearly, these are certain things which we do not give a great importance initially. Why? Because when we are going to build a house, you build with trust and integrity factor, thinking that nothing is going to happen. But when something happens to your most precious asset, like your house or your car, then all of a sudden you start thinking that why I did not take an insurance. The moment we use this word miscellaneous, we mean to say that these are something which are not being given a top priority on our mind in terms of protecting. We just believe that nothing will happen and we just keep on moving. But then now the time has come for all of us to start thinking in this manner that we need to protect even those non-living factors. It is not enough that you have taken a medical insurance, you have been able to cover yourself, but you need to go a step forward and try to cover even those non-living assets. Now, the next thing is that the property insurance, we are going to talk about it in a top way today because property insurance in India is coming up in a very, very big way. There was a time in India when people used to think about investing in property. Why? Because the Indian culture is more about building houses using a plot or a piece of land. But we never believed at one point of time that we will be having multi-story buildings of great heights, having 100 or 50 floors and all together, and people would be living right up to the sky level. But today what has happened, and when you start seeing all those metro cities, you will suddenly get into your mindset that people are literally living in the sky, because you see all those skyrocketing buildings, all about 30, 40 floors or even 50, 60 floors all together, and they all live in luxury apartments. Now, what happens when you look in for these kind of buildings? These buildings are subjected to the nature's forces. So there might be a lightning that can strike, or there might be an earthquake, there might be a fire accident. We never know what can affect your property. So now property risks relate to the burglary, housebreaking, theft, crop insurance, all those factors that can come into the ideology altogether. Now, when I say this property, it also includes your farming land, because that is also a part of the property. So that's why I am mentioning the crop insurance here. Now, any property, movable or immovable, present or future, vested or contingent, can be insured from the losses by accidents other than fire and marine adventure. So very, very important for us to know. The most important part of this branch is the burglary insurance. Even that is very, very important for all of us to know. Why? Because when we are speaking about this kind of insurance, it is highly important, mandatory for all of us to understand why this insurance is trying to come up in a big way. Now, when you are talking about houses, or when you're talking about farmlands or plantations or estates and other factor, they are subjected to many kinds of destruction. Suddenly there might be a breakout, suddenly there might be riots, there might be a landslide. Any of this thing can happen which can leave your asset completely in doldrums. Now, we don't want that situation to happen. We want to protect ourselves from any kind of incidents that are happening altogether. So what we typically tend to do here is that we go back and we start thinking about how to build a system that can actually cover all these factors. So what we tend to do here is that we tend to start understanding ourselves, is this a right time for us to go ahead and start looking into protecting it. So we have to buy an insurance coverage that will protect us from all kind of damages and restore us back to normalcy. So property insurance is getting up in a big way in India, where most of the promoters, builders have today prompted the buyers to go looking for good insurance. In fact, whenever you are planning to buy a new flat or a building or an asset, automatically those companies are promoting insurances so that you are able to take care of your valuable asset. Additional factor that you need to learn about the property insurance is that property insurance is not going to be that easy in terms of just continuing it, because it involves a lot of evaluation. It involves a lot of factors that we have to calculate before this gets into it. Now, theft insurance is also becoming a very, very important factor of the property insurance. So that is also getting covered as a part of this activity. The next one is called as the liability insurance. This is a very, very important term that we have to learn as a part of our exercise. Just as a person can insure himself from the risk of death, personal injury, or damage, destruction of property, similarly, there can also be an insurance against the risk of incurring liability to the third parties. Now, let's understand, if life is important, so is important the financial aspect and the continuation of the business. Many a times what it happens is that, yes, we are hale and healthy because of God's blessing. Things are going on well. Everything is good. But if there is going to be a hit on the business front, if there is going to be a hit in terms of our regular day-to-day activities altogether, then who is going to come and help us out? Who is going to insure us in terms of all these events? So that is where the risk of liability arising out of use of property under the category commonly called as the liability insurance. Why? Because let me make you understand, the risk of liability arising out of use of property comes under this particular category. Now, because of using a property, because of, when we are going to lose out on certain things, when we are going to lose on the business front, or if there is going to be any kind of liability that's going to form against us, we need something to back us out. So in that case, we are going to talk about a liability insurance altogether. Now, that liability insurance can be used as a monitoring purpose, which can go further and try to help us out. Now, there are times when we also need to understand, suppose a company has started up a new business and the business has gone into a loss by usage of the property, or there is some risk because of the involvement of the property. The company can go forward and claim this liability insurance so that it is able to protect itself from further damages. The next thing is the motor vehicle insurance, quite a known factor, though we have spoken about it in the previous sessions. But then motor vehicle insurance still remains as one of the topmost priority business when we are talking about, especially to the Indian context. With the rising number of automobiles entering into India, the risk factor is also increasing. The number of accidents are also increasing. So it becomes very, very important for each each one of us in this country to start looking in for a motor vehicle insurance policy which will help us to cover at any given point of time. Now, one of the most important thing is that a policy for a motor vehicle insurance is ordinarily combined with insurance against the damage to the motor vehicle and its accessories, death or injury to the occupant of the vehicle, and also from the risk of liability in terms of injury. Now, what is happening these days is that one side we are talking about the rising automobiles, the other side we also need to know about the amount of technology, amount of gadgets that are being fitted into the car. Why? Because the safety priority factors are going up in India to a greater extent. Nowadays, we have got multiple cameras fitted inside the car. We've got a high-end technology that can protect us, that can guide us while we are going on the road. We have an autopilot mode. We also have something like where we have airbags and we have got sensory controls that can actually help the driver before getting hit. But with all these factors being in, still the risk of getting injured, the risk of getting into a fatal scenario is always there. In that scenario, in that case, we need to have an insurance that will protect the person who's been driving the car and the people who are seated inside. So what we typically try to do here is that motor vehicle insurance is more of a family insurance kind of thing, which will help you to reduce the third-party liability and help you to take care in case of any accident happening. Now, why do I always mention this is because there are times when you never know that because of somebody's mistake, because of the fault made by somebody else, there is a problem, there is a challenge that is being caused on your family. There is a scenario where you are completely affected. So that should not happen at any given point of time. I would always say that because whenever you are looking in for a scenario, whenever you are looking in for a situation which needs to update, which needs to be intact, that time you need to have an insurance cover. So even without your knowledge, if there is going to be an accident happening or some of your near dear is going to get affected, injured, you need to have this motor vehicle insurance that can protect your family. Now, the next thing is professional liability insurance, miscellaneous professional liability insurance. That's the term that we are going to talk about. This is very, very interesting for all of us to know. Why? Because it's a term business owners and consultants should know and understand. So tomorrow, when you guys are going to become businessmen, entrepreneurs, you need to know about this. And taking this necessary measure will protect you and your life's work, which is very, very important in terms of what are all the mistakes that are going to happen, like where this type of insurance will actually cover you. Now, the definition of miscellaneous professional liability is that insurance coverage that helps financial protection of an individual or a company that performs any kind of professional duty and has an allegation brought against them. Now, what happens here is that most of us, when we start a business, we do not know what kind of troubles we might run into. Now, the troubles that we are speaking about today is not just about the external risk, but there are internal risks also. When you look at Amazon, when you look at Flipkart, when you look at Zomato, there have been cases where they have been charged for not following the competition rules. They have been tried to going on a monopoly kind of thing. So they have not been going through the fair practices. So there has always been a professional allegation against these kind of institutions or companies saying that there have been charges. They have not been able to maintain and follow the rules. So in those kind of situation, you know that you have not done a mistake. You have rather tried to invent and innovate a new platform for growth. But then there are times when you have been charged by the public, by the society, and by the government, stating that the practices that you are following in your organization is not really worth. This will actually lead to the reputation of the company, a damage to the reputation of the company, company, and it will also lead to some financial distress. So in order to protect yourself from the financial distress, in order to protect yourself from all kinds of problems that arises from the professional front, you need to have an insurance, and that's where we bring in this professional liability insurance. Now let's say that you are an auditor or a chartered accountant or an architect or a lawyer or a doctor. These are all professions, what we call it as a self-styled profession. Now you are doing your service for the society after charging a fees, no doubt about it. But then if people are going to directly hit on your service saying that what you have done is wrong, that is going to cause a greater liability in your life. So in order to cover yourself from these kind of situations and scenarios, I would always suggest that you need to have a liability, a miscellaneous liability cover altogether. And this will help the organization to come back to normalcy, help to protect them at any given point of time. Followed by the professional liability insurance will be able to cover from these legal as well as from the number of reasons. But these are some of the common reasons that I would like to tell about why you need to go upon this particular insurance. Not performing upon an agreed upon task. Now there are times when we go back and say that there is an agreement that is signed between two companies and you have not actually performed on the task given to you. So you have not been able to deliver what you have been told. So I can sue your company. In that case, again, you need to cover yourself against the liability that is coming up. So it is mandatory there that you start thinking how to protect yourself from this kind of a scenario. It is very, very common these days that companies get into agreements, they get into contracts, but unfortunately somewhere down the lane they forget the promise, they forget the entire activity, what has to be listed, what has to be done, and it automatically leads into a legal case or a scenario. Now failing to meet deadlines, quite obvious. Most of the time you see that companies promise some date but you are not able to keep up on the date, automatically that leads to a case upon you. So that's why you need to have a liability cover insurance for yourself. Followed by overlooking important details. Because of the experience and the confidence, this sometimes gets translated into overconfidence. So you start believing and taking things to your advantage and you forget about those minute details which have to be followed in the insurance contract, in the contract of the business altogether. So what happens? You miss out on the details, the opponents are ready to file a case against you and you have to be penalized for a huge amount. So in order to protect yourself again, you need to have a liability insurance cover. Not communicating effectively. About 80% of the companies in the world do not actually talk to their customers. That's a very, very big problem. People think that if you send out emails or if you send out messages, they might consider it as an inconvenience. So let us not do it. Only when the customer walks up to me, let me enlighten him. But that is wrong. It's mandatory for the company to communicate every time, tell the people, tell the stakeholders and the business personalities what they are doing, how they are doing it. So communication is a very, very important and effective manner of reaching the people. The next thing is forgetting to do something. Forgetting to do something is quite normal. Why? Because it just goes away from your senses that you have to do this on a priority basis. You miss out on the date and this leads to a lot of problems. So that's why I say that this is mandatory to have an insurance coverage, a liability insurance, which will actually help you to overcome the scenario. With this, I come to the end of this session. I believe that all the information shared through this session will be of a great help and resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we shall be seeing more about the different factors of the general insurance. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.